Today we're talking about vegan pantry essentials. These are not going to be things like flour, sugar, salt, soy sauce, that sort of stuff that everyone might already have on hand. But these are going to be the things that if you weren't vegan, you probably wouldn't have in your pantry. I'm going to talk about the essential things that I use. These are things that I actually have on hand all the time. I keep them stocked always. If I was running low on them, they would immediately go on my shopping list. I think they're really simple and practical ingredients that can be found most places. And if not, they can be found online generally pretty easily. And they're pretty inexpensive. They're not like super specialty things that are just for one recipe. I think they're pretty versatile and I use them a lot in a variety of different things. Number one is Better Than Bouillon vegetable base. Now, this is something that I use all the time. I love this stuff. I don't ever buy liquid or like canned or boxed broth. I just use this. I think it tastes incredible. I use it for a base for so many different things. Any soup, stew, chili, anything that I make uses this as a base. And basically what you do is put 1 teaspoon of this bouillon paste in a cup of hot water, and there's like 38 teaspoons in this one little jar. So it lasts a long time, and I think it's just like such a great buy, and I have multiple of these in my pantry. I think it makes a really awesome Western style broth. Think like chicken noodle soup. I think it makes like a perfect broth base for that style of soup. Number 2 is black salt or call it amok. Black salt is a very sulfury kind of salt. It's used to get like a really eggy flavor out of whatever you're making. Since I tend to think of eggs as having like that sulfury sort of taste. And I think it's perfect for anything like a tofu scramble or a quiche or a fritter, or even like a carbonara where one of the predominant flavors is eggs. This stuff is awesome. And I think really like amps the flavor up for those like eggy style dishes. Number 3 is Nutritional yeast. If you're vegan or you know any vegans, you've probably heard about this stuff or you use it all the time. This stuff is incredible. It has a very rich sort of nutty or cheesy or buttery sort of flavor. It's perfect for cheese sauces or anywhere you're trying to get like that nutty like cheesy flavor. So I use this in basically any pasta dish, whether it's going into the sauce itself or being sprinkled on top. I use this for tofu scrambles and any sort of cheese sauce that I make. This stuff is awesome, gets used up a lot, and I always have it on hand. Vegan mayo. So there's a lot of different types of vegan mayo. Honestly, I think the best one is this Best Foods vegan mayo. I think it has the best flavor and texture. Now, I never really liked mayo when I wasn't vegan. I feel like I literally never even bought it. But once I went vegan, I guess I just had this like fascination and obsession with it because it's such a versatile thing. It's basically just like an oil and vinegar base, and you can use it for the normal things like sandwiches, potato salads, macaroni salad, coleslaw, that sort of stuff that you might use mayo for. But it's a little more versatile than that, I think. Since it is that oil base, you could do something like coat tofu in it and then like sear the tofu. But something unusual that I do with it is put a dollop of it into a pasta sauce, and it makes it like super rich and creamy, and doesn't have that like mayo-y taste. I think it's a much cleaner taste than like normal mayo. I love this stuff. Every vegan definitely has a can of chickpeas or garbanzo beans in their pantry. So because of that, this might not be super revolutionary. However, something that I like to specifically point out is I make sure to get chickpeas with no salt added. So the water in a can of chickpeas is called aquafaba, and you can use that for a variety of different things. I use it in baking all the time, in cookies and cakes. You can use it as a replacement for an egg white in like a whiskey sour, or you can make like an aioli with that aquafaba liquid. So why I specifically call out this is because I buy the no salt added chickpeas. And I think that's really important because if you try to make something like cookies or a whiskey sour with that salt added can of chickpeas, it'll end up tasting, I think honestly, like hot dog water. So I just prefer to get the no salt added and then season it to my taste. And something that I make all the time using that mayo and the call and amok that we had before, if you mash some chickpeas up into a bowl, put some mayo and some call and amok, you have the basis for an incredible chickpea salad sandwich that I eat all the time. Mushroom seasoning. This stuff is really awesome. So you can find this at most Asian grocery stores that I've been to. It's pretty cheap. This huge bag is like $2, I think. And it adds such a umami sort of taste. It's that similar flavor of MSG. However, this has significantly less sodium than both salt and MSG, even though this does have a bit of salt in it. But if you just try some of this straight up, it's those same sort of umami flavors that MSG provides because they extracted the glutamates out of mushrooms. You can put a tablespoon or two of this into any sort of saucy base that is going into your dish, and it's gonna add that like wonderfully rich MSG umami flavor that MSG is gonna provide. Similarly, for adding umami into dishes, I always have these dried shiitake mushrooms on hand. And it could be that I'm rehydrating them to actually eat them straight up in like a ramen, or to use the liquid that they're soaking in for something like the base of the sauce in like a mapo tofu. Raw blue agave. I use this all the time for anything that calls for honey. I use it as a replacement for honey, pretty much just straight up. Some people will use maple syrup, but sometimes that adds just like too much mapley taste into whatever you're making. So I love having this around just as like a one-to-one replacement of honey. Coconut cream. I use this pretty much as like a one-to-one replacement for heavy cream in a lot of dishes. It's really great for like Indian style dishes, like a butter chicken sort of thing, or like a bisque similar to the one that I just recently made that uses coconut cream. And my tip here is that I tend to go for ones like this that have a couple ingredients like some gums to emulsify it, which some people might not like, but I think it ends up with like a better, more emulsified texture in your final product. Whereas ones like the Trader Joe's coconut cream, the solids in the water separate because it's just organic coconut, and that can sometimes be difficult to like emulsify into your dish unless you're putting it into like a blender or something. Basically, if you pick up the can in the grocery store and shake it vigorously and it's got a lot of water in it, I typically go for the ones that you don't really hear much when you shake it. Worcestershire sauce. I use this stuff all the time, whether it's for a chili, beef stew, vegan sloppy joe, or my homemade barbecue sauce is like mostly Worcestershire sauce. And what it does is it adds a nice irony, vinegary flavor into whatever you're cooking. I kind of associate it with like A1 sauce, which in my head is just like very beefy. So this sort of stuff adds a lot of depth to something that you're making, whether it's barbecue or any of those sorts of stews, things that are supposed to be really like meaty and beefy. Now, I specifically get this Kroger like store brand Worcestershire sauce because it's really cheap and they don't make it that like traditional anchovy fermented sauce. So it just so happens that this cheaper version is like accidentally vegan. But if you can't find that, what you can do is you can make your own from a blackstrap molasses. And this is good stuff to have around if you're trying to get those like richer, more meaty, irony, beefy sort of flavors. This has a lot of iron and adds to that flavor palette. So what you could do is you could whip up some of this in some vinegar with some salt, sugar, garlic powder, and onion powder, and effectively have like a really quick and simple Worcestershire sauce. These are artificial chicken and beef broth mix powders. They're basically like a bouillon powder that you can buy at a lot of Asian grocery stores. There are so many brands that make these. I specifically have the Lee and Dragonfly brands, but there's a ton out there. All you need to do is just read the ingredients and make sure that it says like artificial chicken or beef flavor. Now, these things I don't ever actually use as like a broth mix. I end up using it just as a seasoning, as part of the seasoning that's going into a specific dish. These are of course both heavy in salt and MSG, so they're super savory and umami. However, the beef one has basically like Chinese 5-spice in it. It's got like clove and star anise and cinnamon, and ends up reminding me of like a Christmas baked like honey ham. But again, we're just using it as like adding that glutamate flavor that a lot of meat tends to have. These both have really strong flavors, so a little goes a long way. But if you're trying to make some like taco meat or whatever you're trying to make, if you're trying to make something like meaty, this just adds like another layer of flavor into that. Lastly, we have miso paste. This is just miso paste that I got at the local grocery store since I didn't really want to go out of my way to get to the Asian market. And so this one, it says that it's a Hawaiian style, which to me, it just tastes maybe like a little bit lighter and maybe a bit sweeter. I use this all the time. It adds a lot of that like umami flavor. I specifically most use it for just making like a ramen broth or just making a simple miso soup. This has a lot of uses. People use it in like cookies and baking. You can make salad dressings with it. You can make like miso glazes with agave and garlic, but I most often use it just as like a simple ramen base. You can get a really wonderful and flavorful ramen base just with this miso alone. So you'll specifically want to make sure that you're picking out one that does not have fish in it, that doesn't say like bonito or bonito flakes. So generally they will say vegan on it, but you'll just want to make sure of that. So there's my pantry essentials. These are the things that I always have on hand. I always keep in stock. So I hope you enjoyed. I'll have links for everything that I can find online in the description below, and thanks for watching.